The billionaire boss answers a hospital call. She then ICU. You're her only hope. The call came at 2:47 a.m. Damien Cross was still awake in his penthouse office, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind him like a canvas of fallen stars. At 36, he'd built an empire that spanned 3 continents, turned failing companies into billion-dollar ventures, and earned a reputation for being as brilliant as he was ruthless. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when there were markets opening in Tokyo, deals closing in London, and competitors who never rested. His phone vibrated against the mahogany desk. Unknown number. He almost declined it, probably another journalist fishing for a quote about his latest acquisition, but something made him answer. Cross. Mr. Cross? The voice was female, professional, strained. This is Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Mount Sinai Hospital. I'm calling about Emma Hartley. Damien's hand tightened around the phone. He hadn't heard that name in 3 years. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, to be exact. Not that he was counting. What about her? His voice came out harder than he intended. She's been in a severe car accident. She's in the ICU, and the doctor paused. Mr. Cross, you're listed as her emergency contact. You're the only person listed. The words hit him like a physical blow. Emma, in the ICU. And he was her only contact, which meant she had no one else. No family, no friends, just him, the man she'd walked away from. Without looking back, I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 15. The ICU was a study in controlled chaos. Machines beeped in rhythmic symphony. Nurses moved with purposeful efficiency. And the air carried that distinctive hospital smell of antiseptic and desperation. Mitchell met him outside room 412, her face drawn with exhaustion and concern. Mr. Cross, thank you for coming so quickly. She extended her hand, and he shook it, noting the firm grip. Emma's condition is critical but stable. She has severe internal injuries, a punctured lung, fractured ribs, and significant head trauma. We've induced a medical coma to give her body time to heal. What are her chances? Damien asked, his businesslike demeanor a shield against the emotion threatening to crack through. If she makes it through the next 72 hours, her prognosis improves significantly. But Mr. Cross, Dr. Mitchell's eyes held his. She needs someone here. Studies show that coma patients respond to familiar voices, familiar presences. You're her only hope of pulling through this. Her only hope. The phrase echoed in his mind as Dr. Mitchell led him to the room. Nothing could have prepared him for seeing Emma like this. She lay motionless in the hospital bed, dwarfed by medical equipment. Tubes and wires connected her to machines that breathed for her, monitored her, kept her tethered to life. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with a nasty bruise blooming along her left temple. But even battered and broken, she was still Emma, the woman who had turned his world upside down and inside out. Damien stood in the doorway, frozen. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been walking away from him, her resignation letter on his desk, her words still echoing. I can't be what you need me to be, Damien, and you can't be what I need. He'd let her go. It was the biggest mistake of his life. I'll leave you alone with her, Dr. Mitchell said softly. Talk to her. Tell her stories. Let her know she's not alone. Alone. The word that had defined both their lives. Damien pulled the chair closer to Emma's bed and sat down, his tall frame seeming too large, too vital in this space of fragility. He looked at her hand lying motionless on the white sheet, remembering how it used to gesture animatedly when she pitched ideas in meetings, how it felt in his during the few stolen moments they'd had together before everything fell apart. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand in his. It was cool and small, but he could feel her pulse, faint but steady. Hey, Emma, he said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. It's me. It's Damien. The machines continued their steady beeping. Emma didn't move. I know it's been a while. 3 years. I've thought about calling you 1,000 times, but I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry seemed too small for what happened between us, but I am sorry. I'm so damn sorry. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Talking had never been his strong suit. He was better with numbers, strategies, cold hard facts. But Emma deserved more than that. She'd always deserved more than he knew how to give. Do you remember the first day you walked into my office? He continued, his thumb unconsciously stroking the back of her hand. You were 25, fresh out of business school, and you had the audacity to tell me my expansion strategy for the European market was flawed. No one had ever challenged me like that. Everyone else just nodded and agreed with whatever I said. But not you. You had data, projections, alternative plans. You were brilliant. A ghost of a smile touched his lips at the memory. I hired you on the spot, made you my executive assistant, though we both knew you were overqualified. Within 6 months, you'd reorganized my entire operation, streamlined processes I didn't even know were inefficient, and increased productivity by 30%. Within a year, you were basically running half my company. His grip on her hand tightened slightly, and somewhere in there between the late nights at the office and the business trips to London and Singapore, between the strategy sessions and the victory dinners, I fell in love with you. The admission hung in the air. He'd never said it out loud before, not even to her when she'd been awake to hear it. I know I never told you. I know I kept things professional, maintained boundaries, acted like what we had was just mutual respect, good working chemistry. But Emma, it was so much more than that. You became the first person I wanted to talk to in the morning and the last person I thought about at night. You made me laugh when I didn't think I remembered how. You challenged me, frustrated me, inspired me. You made me want to be better. A nurse entered quietly to check Emma's vitals, gave Damien a sympathetic nod, and left just as quietly. But I was a coward, Damien continued, his voice dropping. I was so afraid of losing you as my assistant, as my colleague, that I never risked telling you how I really felt. And then that night happened, the Parker acquisition celebration. We'd worked 6 months on that deal. And when it finally closed, everyone went home except us. We stayed in the office, sharing a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for years. He could still remember every detail of that night. Emma laughing, her hair falling loose from its usual professional bun. The way the city lights reflected in her eyes, how the space between them had gradually decreased until they were standing so close he could count her heartbeats. We almost kissed, he said softly. We were so close, but I pulled away. I told you it was inappropriate, that we needed to maintain professional boundaries. I saw the hurt in your eyes, Emma. I saw it, and I did nothing. The memory still ached like a fresh wound. The next morning your resignation was on my desk. 2 weeks later, you were gone. You took a position at a startup across the country, and I told myself it was for the best, that you'd be happier, have more opportunities. But the truth is, I was just protecting myself. I was so used to being alone, to building walls around my heart, that I didn't know how to let you in. Damien fell silent, watching the steady rise and fall of Emma's chest, each breath maintained by the ventilator. Dr. Mitchell's words echoed in his mind. You're her only hope. I need you to fight, Emma, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I need you to come back. There's so much I never got to tell you. So much I want to make right. The hours blurred together. Damien sat by Emma's bedside as dawn broke over the city, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and pink. He talked until his voice grew hoarse, sharing stories she'd never heard about his childhood in foster care, bouncing between homes, learning early that the only person you could rely on was yourself. About building his first company at 23 with nothing but determination and a laptop in a studio apartment. About the emptiness that success brought, the hollow victory of having everything except the one thing that mattered. Nurses came and went. Dr. Mitchell checked in periodically. The machines continued their vigilant monitoring, and Damien stayed, his hand never leaving Emma's. On the second night, as exhaustion threatened to drag him under, he found himself remembering their last conversation before she left. She'd come to his office to say goodbye, and he'd been cold, professional, already rebuilding his walls. I wish you the best, Miss Hartley, he'd said, not even looking up from his computer. I'm sure you'll do well wherever you go. He hadn't seen the tears in her eyes until it was too late. I was such an idiot, he whispered now, his head bowed over their joined hands. I had everything I'd ever wanted right in front of me, and I was too blind and scared to reach for it. I thought being alone made me strong. But you taught me something, Emma. You taught me that real strength is in allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to open your heart even when it's terrifying. I just learned that lesson too late. The third day brought no change in Emma's condition. Dr. Mitchell warned him that the longer she remained in the coma, the more uncertain her recovery became. But Damien refused to leave, refused to give up. He had his assistant bring him changes of clothes and his laptop, turning the small waiting area outside Emma's room into a makeshift office. Word had spread through his company about where he was and why. His board called emergency meetings without him. Deals were put on hold. For the first time in his career, Damien Cross wasn't available, wasn't putting business first, and he didn't care that late on the third night, as he sat reading to her from a book he'd found in the hospital gift shop, a terrible romance novel that he knew would have made her laugh. He felt it. The smallest movement. Her finger twitched against his palm. Emma. He leaned forward, his heart pounding. Emma, can you hear me? Another twitch. Then her eyelids fluttered. Damien hit the call button. And within seconds, Dr. Mitchell and a team of nurses flooded the room. They asked him to step back, but he refused to let go of her hand, even as they worked around him. Emma, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand, Dr. Mitchell instructed Dot. The seconds stretched into eternity. Then, impossibly, miraculously, Emma's fingers tightened around Damien's hand. The next hours were a blur of medical procedures and tests. They slowly reduced her sedation, monitoring her responses carefully. And as dawn broke on the fourth day, Emma's eyes finally opened. They were unfocused at first, confused. The ventilator tube prevented her from speaking. But when her gaze found Damien's face, still there after 3 days, something flickered in those familiar eyes: recognition, confusion, and something else, something that looked like hope. It took another week before the tubes came out and Emma could speak. Damien was there when she managed her first words, his hand still holding hers as it had almost every moment since that first night. You stayed, she whispered, her voice hoarse and wondering. Of course I stayed, he said, bringing her hand to his lips. I told you, Emma. You're not alone. Not anymore. Tears streaked down her cheeks. Why? It was the question he'd been waiting for, the one he finally knew how to answer. Because I love you, Damien said simply. I've loved you since the day you walked into my office and challenged me. I loved you when you worked beside me, when you left me, every moment in between. And I'll love you through whatever comes next if you'll let me. Emma's tears fell faster. I loved you too, she whispered. I still do. But Damien, you broke my heart. I know. He pressed his forehead gently against hers, careful of her injuries. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll give me the chance. No more walls, Emma. No more fear. Just us, figuring it out together. She was quiet for a long moment, searching his face. Then, slowly, painfully, she lifted her free hand and touched his cheek, feeling the 3 days of stubble he hadn't bothered to shave. You look terrible, she said, and despite everything, there was a hint of her old humor in her voice. He laughed, the sound breaking with emotion. You should see the other guy. Damien? Yeah? Stay. Always, he promised. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time in 3 years, Emma smiled, really smiled at the billionaire boss who had finally learned that being someone's only hope meant being brave enough to let them be yours too.